Hey everybody. We get to start a whole new magazine this week. This week we are reading about revolutionary women in more ways than one. So today, the first day we are doing this, the first video, we'll be reading pages 2 through 7 today. And please remember, go get your own magazine and follow along. So pause this video if you need to grab your magazine. Otherwise, let's get started. So the cover is a revolutionary woman, tinkers, tailors, soldiers, spies, loyal patriotic loyalists. Look at this. Page 2. All right. In 1775, Britain ruled 13 colonies on North America's eastern coast, from Massachusetts, which included what is now Maine, to Georgia. Many colonists were tired of British rule. They had argued with Britain for years about taxes and laws they thought were unfair. In April 1775, fighting broke out between the colonists and the British Army. The American Revolution had begun. We remember reading all about that, right? At the time of the Revolution, a woman's role in society was limited. Most women were expected to spend their lives taking care of their home and family. Women prepared meals over an open fire, milked the cows, and fed the chickens. They churned butter and made candles and soap. Most of them also made their families' clothing. Poor women and enslaved African women did all this while also working for other people. Women were not expected to take part in politics or business. The world of politics was for white male property owners. Still, many women became involved in events leading up to the revolution and in the revolution itself. Some were patriots who believed in independence for the colonies. Others were loyalists who supported Britain's king. All were very brave to step outside of their traditional roles. Let's take a look at this photo. Do you guys have any guess what event this was? Looks like people throwing things into the water from a boat. Do you remember? Let's find out. The colonists wanted to protest a British tax on tea. On the night of December 16th, 1773, some men boarded ships and threw all of their cargo of tea into Boston Harbor. The event is now called the Boston Tea Party. Sarah Fulton helped the men disguise themselves as Mohawk warriors. Afterward, she heated water in her kitchen so they could wash off the disguises. That's why she is called the mother of the Boston Tea Party. So we've learned about this event, and now we've learned about a woman who helped in that event, Sarah Fulton. Let's take a look at this black and white drawing here. In 1774, in Edenton, North Carolina, 51 women signed a petition. It said they would boycott, not buy, British goods. It was unheard of for women to take such a public stand. The British cartoon pokes fun of the women of Edenton for unladylike behavior. Oh, okay. See these women looking a little funny looking, signing this petition? They're making fun of them. This portrait right here. Mercy Otis Warren was the sister and the wife of a well-known patriot. She received her education by listening in on her brother's lessons. She wrote plays that made fun of British rulers. Back then, plays usually were not staged in New England, but they were printed in newspapers. That's where people read Warren's plays. Very cool. And on the bottom of page 2, here's a nice map of the 13 colonies from what is now Maine all the way to Georgia. The blue dots are American victories during the Revolution. The red dots are British victories. For the first few years of the Revolution, most of the fighting was done in the north. Then the British attacked the south. The last major battle was fought in Yorktown, Virginia in 1781, but some smaller fights took place after that. Yorktown in 1781, right here. Looks like the Americans won. Makes sense, right? And this image says, Loyalist women also made their opinions known. Many took pride in serving imported tea. Anne and Elizabeth Betsy Cummins kept selling British goods in their Boston shop. Local patriots wanted them to stop. Betsy told the patriots that they were hurting two industrious girls who were trying, in an honest way, to get their bread. So even though they were selling British tea, they were businesswomen trying to make a living. I really like this painting of two women. Looks like they're at probably their home preparing some food. Let's turn now to pages 4 and 5. Another beautiful painting here. Looks like she's in war uniform. Serving the cause, top of page 4. Women were not allowed to serve in George Washington's Continental Army, but evidence shows that at least 4 women became part of the fighting force. Boys as young as 14 joined the army, so a woman could wear loose clothing and serve in an army by pretending to be a young man. One woman from Maine joined up with her brother in 1775. She served until the war ended in 1781. In 1776, an unidentified Cherokee woman was found dead on a battlefield. She wore face paint like male warriors did, and she had a bow and arrows. I wonder if she was fighting too. I would imagine so. Let's learn about Deborah Sampson. Deborah Sampson was a Massachusetts farmer and school teacher who loved adventure. In 1782, after the last battle of the war, but while there was still some fighting, she joined the Continental Army as Robert Shirtliff. She served for a year and a half. One story says she was hit by a musket ball and cut the ball down of her own leg to avoid being looked at by a doctor. Oh, and cut the ball out of her own leg to avoid being looked at by a doctor because she was pretending to be a man, right? Later, a doctor discovered her secret of being a woman while treating her for a fever. The Army gave Sampson an honorable discharge in October 1783. Let's take a look at this drawing here. Sally St. Clair was part French and part African. Some say she joined the army in disguise to be near her boyfriend. Her identity was not discovered until she died at the British siege of Savannah, Georgia in 1778. Another woman fighter. How about over here? Militias were local fighting units. Some operated in backwoods areas away from large towns. Women who lived in these places were used to firing weapons to defend against Native American attacks. Some put these skills to use against the enemy. Nancy Morgan Hart of Wilkes County, Georgia, took on 5 or 6 loyalists who attacked her home while her husband was away. She shot 2 and captured the rest. Pretty cool. It's hard to imagine having to defend my home like that. Let's take a look at this drawing. In the summer of 1781, the commander of the Continental Army in South Carolina was camped near the home of 16-year-old Emily Geiger. He needed more troops, but the nearest ones were far away. The countryside was full of loyalists. Emily volunteered to carry a message, knowing that a woman wouldn't attract as much attention as a man. But just to be safe, she memorized the message before she hid it in her clothing. Sure enough, British soldiers stopped her. When they went to get a woman to search Emily, she ripped up the message and swallowed the pieces. The British soon let her go, and she delivered the message aloud. Wow. That would be kind of a scary situation. And now for this image. Another brave patriot messenger was also a teenage girl. Sybil Ludington, 16, was the daughter of a New York militia commander. One rainy night in 1777, he asked her to get on a horse and call out his militiamen. They were needed to defend against the British attack near Danbury, Connecticut. Sybil rode her horse about 40 miles to remote farmhouses to alert her father's men that night. Nowadays, we'd probably just call them, right? Very brave. And this painting, let's read its caption up here. Anne Bailey's military career did not go as well as Deborah Sampson's. Remember this woman? In 1777, Bailey enlisted in the army as Samuel Gay. Within 3 weeks, she was promoted to corporal, but soon her disguise was discovered and she ran away. A few months later, Bailey was captured and tried in court. She was fined, sentenced to 2 months in jail, and discharged from the army. Interesting. Remember, Deborah had an honorable discharge, but Anne did not. So let's try to read our think piece on the bottom of page 5. It required great courage for a woman to take an active part in the patriot cause. What do you think made the women described on these pages so daring? What was more important to them than the dangers they faced? What made them so daring? And what was so important that they were willing to face all these dangers? Take a second to think about that. Pause if you need to. And when you're ready, let's read the last 2 pages for this video. There'll be more on the next videos. It looks like we're going to read about camp followers. Let's do it. Top of page 6. Thousands of women followed their husbands to battle. They were known as camp followers. Some were looking for adventure, and others wanted to be with their loved ones. But most became camp followers because they needed to survive. They were poor women who feared that they and their children would starve while their husbands were at war. Camp followers were paid for their services as laundresses and nurses. They also were fed. But women got only half a soldier's portion of food, or half rations, and children got only quarter rations. Let's take a look at this one. Some camp followers worked as nurses in field hospitals. They were paid, but not much. In those days, nursing was not a skilled or respected job. Nurses emptied chamber pots, bathed and fed sick soldiers, and tried to keep hospital wards clean by sprinkling vinegar around many times each day. Very little was known about preventing disease at that time. Nurses risked catching any diseases the soldiers had. In this photo here, life was hard for camp followers. Diseases spread quickly through the crowded camps. Lice, fleas, bed bugs, and other pests were a constant problem. Food was also scarce, or hard to come by. Like men, women could be whipped or thrown out of a camp for offenses like petty, minor theft. Women sometimes did dangerous jobs. Sarah Osborne carried food to men at the front during the siege of Yorktown. When George Washington asked if she was afraid of the cannonballs, Osborne replied, It would not do for the men to fight and starve too. Over here on page 7, it's a picture of George Washington. George Washington was an upper-class gentleman. He was used to women with good manners who dressed in fine clothing. He thought the camp followers made his army look sloppy. When the Continental Army marched through Philadelphia in August 1779, he ordered the camp followers to use the back streets. He didn't want them to be seen with the soldiers, but he believed having wives in camp kept some men from deserting. Interesting. In this portrait, officers' wives usually came to visit their husbands only during winter camp, when the army stayed in one place. They knitted socks and sewed for the soldiers, but their main task was to keep up their husbands' spirits. They did this by organizing dances and card parties. Even Martha Washington below joined her husband in winter quarters. On her first visit to Boston, she brought George's favorite jams and relishes and several cured hams. That kind of makes sense. I don't know if I'd want to follow a camp as it kept moving and moving and moving. So in the winter, they stayed in one place. And this image right here, British troops also had their camp followers. Many had sailed to America with their husbands. They were ragged and often hungry, and loyalists accused them of stealing food. They were allowed to stay in America only as long as their husbands could fight. The first widows and orphans sailed back to England in the summer of 1775. So a widow is a woman who lost her husband, and orphans, they would have lost their dad. So this photo here, right here, kind of looks like a reenactment. Let's find out. A few camp followers served on the battlefield. Some of them carried cold water for cooling down the cannons. Two famous water carriers were Margaret Corbin and Mary Hayes, known as Molly Pitcher. Corbin took over her husband's cannon when he died in battle. She fired it until her arm was nearly torn off by grape shot, or small iron balls shot from a cannon. Hayes also took over from her husband when he collapsed from heat. One soldier's journal claims a British cannonball blew off the lower part of her petticoat, but she kept on firing. That's all for this video. We learned about camp followers, women serving in the cause, serving in the Revolutionary War, and women getting ready for the revolution. So, come back for the next video, and we will read pages 8 through 13. I will see you then.